Okay, good morning, everyone. On behalf of CCTE conference team, I'd like to welcome you all to this session. Thank you all for joining us. As you know, our session is a follow-up to the CCTE Fall 2020 virtual conference, which we held in October. Can you hear me well? I just want to make sure okay, thank you.
You're coming through great.
Okay, wonderful. I'm Grace Cho. I'm professor at California State University, Fullerton. I'll be the moderator for this session. As we know that the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic has presented us with so many significant challenges and opportunities. And we will be hearing from our wonderful peers about the impact of COVID-19 on schools and teacher education. I think it's really pertinent, especially nowadays. Some of the logistics that I want to go over with you is, as Ellen stated, that this will be recorded. So feel free to turn on and off for privacy issue. And if possible, please introduce yourself, writing your name and affiliation or email if you want to provide on the chat box. This is not going to be shared to the public. It's just for us to know who you are. And as I have stated in the email that I sent to all the presenters, each team of presenters will have a 5 minute to present, and we will have a follow-up questions pertaining to that specific presentation. And at the end of all the presentation, we will have a discussion. We will open up for a discussion for all presentations. As you can see on the screen, I'll be projecting a PowerPoint slide with presentation title, presenter's name, and short description, while each team introduce your presenters and presentation. Okay, I will have my camera off, but near 5 minutes, I will turn on my camera to signal you that it's time to wrap it up. Okay, so I will try my best to, make sure all attendees has a fair opportunity to share their thoughts and comments throughout the session. I'll be checking the chat box meantime. Now, if any of presenters, if you want to share your own PowerPoints, please let us know now. I think one presenter requested. So Alan, did you make co-host? One of the presenter want to share their own. Okay, wonderful. Any other presenters who needs to be co-host to share the screen? Okay. Okay, if not, we will start with this presentation. So now I will give the floor to the first group of presenters. Please go ahead and start your presentation.
All right, thanks, Grace. Good morning, I'm Emily Bogus, and my partner here today is Dr. Verna Lowe. We're from Western Governors University. We're in the compliance department responsible for regulations, accreditation, and program approval. So again, first, this has been a great week. Thanks CCTE for letting us come and doing these discussions. Quick background on WGU. If you're not familiar, we're a national nonprofit university. We are exclusively online and competency-based, and we have teachers, college students in all US states. So when COVID hit, we had a unique position of needing to understand policies across the nation. And so I started tracking, and of course I continue to track because it's not ending like we all thought it might. It's still going. So we're tracking the policies in ed prep and licensure and the flexibility states are using. And so our research and presentation to CCTE focused on the COVID policies that may help close the achievement gap for our TK-12 students. We're seeing that the learning loss is greater than ever, and especially in our student population that's low income or students of color. And so we focused on these inequities and analyzed two types of policies that may close the achievement gap. And those are increasing workforce diversity, and maintaining a prepared teacher pipeline. So I will hand over to Verna then to share some of our research and findings.
Good morning, everyone. Just a few things related to the achievement gaps and pass rates of licensure exams. We are really looking at teacher shortages across states, and we just got informed by North Carolina 2 days ago that they were going to have a shortage of 8,000 teachers by 2021. We are tracking this across all 50 states as we continue to hear from states about the shortages. And in light of these shortages, these events do create, it really impacts the ability to have a diverse workforce, and that is one of our concerns. The majority of states also, we looked at some other types of regulations. They reduced their clinical hour requirement. Actually, the majority of states in the nation did. There were states, a whole group of them, that granted little or no flexibility whatsoever. Examples would be like Montana, Nebraska. There were also states that shortened the hours for the clinical experience, and that was like Florida and South Carolina. And there were many others as well. And California kind of falls right in the middle because they also allow virtual. So many states allow virtual opportunities, and that's where California falls. Emily, you want to share some more?
Yeah, so in addition to clinical hours, we looked at licensing exams and emergency licenses because one of the barriers to licensure for many teachers are the exams. And it's not just in California, but across the nation, teachers of color have lower pass rates. And so with COVID and these states that are now waiving the exam or delaying it for a bit, it'll be interesting to watch to see if this helps increase the workforce diversity. So in general, there were some states who already had the capacity to do this without changing any policies, like Utah, Florida, Pennsylvania, for example, already had a type of license that would allow students to get in the workforce without taking the exams yet or without passing them. Other states, and not to pick on Montana, but that's another one that there was just no flexibility in licensing. And then there were some that created a new license for these teachers unable to take their exams, like New York, Washington. They were one of the first ones. And then, of course, in California, we have the preliminary credential, and that was expanded to those who were unable to take the exams because of COVID. So what we're learning and we're trying to watch here is policies that can help close that achievement gap. And with licensing exams, we're seeing states that are putting more responsibility on an EPP to assure that the student teacher is ready and prepared. And as a competency-based university, we have multiple measures that are not just exams. And so we're really wanting to watch this to see if we can open up to different measures for our teachers to get their licenses and to begin teaching. We're also going to watch policies for online delivery of instruction. So not just on our side, but for teachers teaching online now. And there was a discussion about that yesterday. That was really good. And then another big area for me that I'm interested in watching is licensure mobility. We have, like I said, we have students all over. And so we're seeing these prepared, experienced teachers that are unable to go to another state to fill in shortages as needed. But they're not able to transfer their license because of exams or coursework. And NASDATEC is actually working on a compact right now. So that's been fun to watch. So those are a few things that I'm particularly interested in watching. And I know Verna has a few more.
Well, I'm just going to close with this. We all need to work much more collaboratively together, and particularly with states. And one of the things that we've been looking at the national arena, and there's a new kind of definition that is emerging that is intriguing us a little bit, and that is a prepared workforce. When we are having to report to 50 different states, the majority of states are using a term called prepared workforce. And they've tiered who qualifies as the prepared workforce. And I wanted to leave you with that thought. And that would be the fully prepared candidates who met all requirements, then the fully prepared candidates who just didn't pass their exams. That's next in the tier. And then a fully prepared candidate who may have had a shorter clinical and didn't take their exams. And then this is one that has popped up greatly this year, and that is student teachers being paid to do student teaching. That is because they do consider them a prepared workforce. And the next prepared workforce were paraprofessionals, paraeducators who were going back to school to get their teaching degree. And then what's most intriguing is alternative routes. The states did not highlight alternative routes as something at the top of that prepared workforce tier. So we're going to leave you with these thoughts. We are going to continue to do the research, so we're going to encourage you to stay tuned.
Thank you for a nice presentation, and thank you. It's a good, it's exciting that still we have a shortage of teachers, something that we can still do. I would like to open up any questions related to this presentation from the audience. Anyone has a question?
Yes, my question would be, so what is the barrier? You're saying that, so we have credentialed teachers, but then they can't go to other states that there is a shortage. So what is that policy barrier? Or is it that, I thought our credentials in California are actually the most transferable, and New York. So I'm wondering if there's a need, what is hindering us to address the need?
Yeah, it's policy in the state, depending on the state you're moving to. Off the top of my head, there's a few, maybe I shouldn't call them out, but a few states that when you apply for reciprocity, they're going to go down and do a course-by-course review instead of just granting you a license. And, you know, all universities have different courses, and you could be short something, or their exams, you know, you have to take the Missouri exams before you can teach there.
Basically, it's an overall regulatory issue, is that they've set regulations that don't allow an easy transfer of that license.
Thank you. And if we have, as we have more questions, we can continue having discussion at the end of all the presentations. Let me move to next team of presenters here. Okay.
We're going to be sharing our slides.
Okay, let me stop sharing.
Okay, so our area of research was using collaborative prismatic inquiry to examine the initial impacts of education during the pandemic. And we're going to kind of like slam through some of the things to get to the findings, which we thought were what would be most of you had access to the monograph and all those other things. So just to kind of move quickly, we worked out of the idea of just kind of basic educational theory. At the time we were looking, there wasn't any research yet on what pandemic education looked like. So we kind of started out of this basic educational theory. And then prismatic inquiry, it works out of Deleuze and Guattari in the theory of using multiple perspectives and multiple looks in order to map out a phenomenon instead of using a reductionist lens. So that's why our team kind of went across multiple areas, multiple fields. We had parents on it. We have a student, a couple of students. We had educators. So we had a whole kind of team looking at what were our experiences with education at the time. And we had a simple prompt, what was working, what needed to be improved, and our overall impressions during the pandemic. And we went through these series of data analysis cycles using multiple perspectives. And because we had a large team with a lot of expertise in multiple forms of research, we also kind of took different perspectives on it. And each did a different cycle of research. But the major areas we found that popped up were students, communication, standards and curriculum, balance, leadership, community, and then areas of difficulty. So for students, James, did you want to step in and
Good morning, everybody. So my perspective is I'm a TK to 6 special education teacher at a local elementary school. And the challenging parts for me were that our school district was very good about communicating to the entire community what the needs and expectations were during the pandemic. But if you go down a little bit, the head of special education didn't really give us the same guidance. They sort of left us out in the open, and they didn't say what education for the special ed students was going to look like. So it was challenging getting this like very strong message from the entire district, but the leadership inside of special education didn't really give us the guidance that we were looking for. So that was a little bit challenging. There wasn't clear guidelines as to what it's going to look like for the students. They just said, do your thing, which was super challenging for somebody like me, who's a teacher who wants to be very planned and organized. But one of the really good things for me that came out of it was it sort of allowed me some flexibility and opportunity to really connect with my parents, not my parents, but the parents of my students, and really sort of forging a relationship during a really challenging time. Yeah, those were the big takeaways for me.
So we found that the focus on standards and curriculum content, it varied wildly. Some educational teams were really focused on, let's hit all our standards, let's make sure our students don't lose any ground. And others were focused on, let's support the emotional health of our students, our parents, the whole world is in the same boat with us, was this kind of, this thinking that this gap was happening for everyone. So it very much went in different directions. There were definitely problems with access that popped up all over the place. And there was a lot more, the transition to online took a lot more out of the K-12 teachers because they weren't used to that arena. Whereas for the college professors, it varied based on their experiences. So if they were already comfortable online, things rolled over very smoothly. But if they were not comfortable teaching online, they were in that same kind of idea of, oh no, what do I do? I'm having to learn the software. And it made it tougher for the students.
Okay. So in terms of balance, we found that a lot of educators with children, me being one of them, in the study, found that we struggled with balancing work life and home life. And oftentimes these lines were very much blurred and continue to be blurred. So in terms of like juggling work, school, our children's learning online, virtual learning, and honestly, like household chores. One of the first year teachers in our study actually found that they were less overworked, overloaded, and they had used this time to reach out to students. And I think James touched upon this. But most of the educators found that teaching online, both the preparation and the execution of the curriculum took significantly more time than teaching like face-to-face in a classroom.
So we also found that in a couple of schools, the leadership was watching the national news and had enough of a science background. They started warning the teachers ahead of time or the professors ahead of time. And it gave more planning time for teachers, and that really helped a lot. The other thing that was really helpful was if there were certain things already a part of the community. So if they were already a community that valued and used flexible thinking, change was not scary. Collaboration, the team aspect was really important to keep teachers and students from feeling like they were alone. And again, the integration of technology, if it was already part of the community culture, it rolled over much more smoothly. The two major areas that were a problem were exhaustion, pretty much across the board. Parents, teachers, students were tired of being on Zoom. It was all across the board. And then this concern about social emotional needs and the gaps that were happening in the spring, because we were keeping our children very, very protected, obviously, for the pandemic, but they weren't making connections. And you had that same sense of isolation where everyone was struggling with that. And that's it.
Thank you. And all the situation that you pointed out from study is something that we all are facing it, right? So you mentioned two area of difficulties. So any solution to that? What's your plan? Why am I asking all the question? But anyway, let me start with my question.
So for the exhaustion, the social emotional needs, we didn't actually come up with solutions for that. Definitely working in ways to connect with students, at least as a professor, ways to connect with students and to build spaces in where students can connect to each other, especially during distance learning, is so important. A lot of what we saw with the spring, which was beyond after our study, was that going back to the classroom and having the kids have a chance to reconnect with each other there was really beneficial for a lot of students. The exhaustion and finding balance, I'm actually, from what I've seen, we've continued looking at, we have a whole team that's actually bigger than this original team. And what we're finding is that I'm getting reports of the exhaustion just gets worse, especially on the K-12
Marni,
platform.
can I speak to that?
Mm-hmm.
So right now I'm actually, I'm working with future educators. I'm teaching online, and I talk to my students about the importance of, self-care, taking care of yourself, because we are taking care of family, we are taking care of loved ones. So that's important. But if we can't, put the oxygen mask, there's an analogy that is pretty widely known. Like if you're on a plane and if you don't put the oxygen mask on yourself first, then you can't really help the others that need, helping. So it's like what I talk to my students about, what can you do to, take care of your spiritual health, your mental health, your physical health. So, I mean, within the confines of this pandemic, so what can you do? Does that mean walking outside safely? Does that mean running? Does that mean, doing some yoga, doing, I talk to my students about thinking about, especially in special education, we have such a high teacher attrition rate. Like, what are they going to do to sustain themselves? Not only physically, not only mentally, but also spiritually. So like, I want my educators to be prepared for this huge responsibility that they're going to be taking on. And it's like, we're talking about children's lives here. We're talking about families' lives. So we need to, it requires connection. It requires community building. It requires love. And so that's also can be a time commitment. And at times, like it can be draining, but it should be, because if we truly care about one another, we are going to feel exhausted. So I think like, we just have to be like constantly reminding ourselves and talking to our students about, yeah, we feel these feelings. It's important to acknowledge them and then say, like, what are we building into our daily routines to make sure that we're sustaining ourselves so that we can contribute to the betterment of humanity, so that we can contribute to make sure our neighbor next door is doing okay. You know what I mean? I think there's a balance. It's not about me, but it's also about taking care of me so that I can really do my duty of taking care of the others. So like I think of the quote, "Let your vision be world embracing rather than confined to your own self." So like, yes, we need to address our own spiritual, physical, mental needs, and then let our vision be world embracing so that we don't do our work in a vacuum, right? We need to, our work should be, we're interconnected as human beings. If we haven't already, I mean, like this virus is living proof that it's not just killing one person, right? It's killing a lot across the human race. So it shows me that we're one human family. And so I hope that we as teacher educators, we as professionals in the field can really think about our own spiritual, mental, physical well-being, and then also think about it's important to take care of ourselves so that we can contribute to the whole of humanity.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. Any word of wisdom from the audience that you want to share? Okay. Let's move on to next presentation and hold your thought and we can have a discussion later on. Let's move to next presentation.
I
Yes.
think Kimmy and I are next again.
Oh, okay. Should I share the screen or is this it's okay?
Oh, I didn't realize mindfulness. Okay.
Yep, it's mindfulness. So it actually follows in with what
okay.
Kimiya was
Wonderful.
just saying. Hang on, I'm gonna switch my presenter views here. So Kimmy, you want to go ahead and start this one?
Sure.
This is your baby.
Yeah. Well, we've been looking at the importance of being mindful human beings as teacher educators and in education in this world that we live in, right? So background literature. So we actually looked at the literature, and Kabat-Zinn, he is like very renowned in this field of mindfulness, and he talks about how what is mindfulness? Mindfulness is really paying attention on purpose, so being purposeful in the present moment and non-judgmentally. Oh, excuse me, I don't know how that happened. So the components of mindfulness really have to do with being able to self-regulate and being able to be aware of when we are being judgmental or non-judgmental, and trying to align ourselves with being free of judgment. And then that we found that in the literature, there's so much literature to support the benefits to educators to practice mindfulness. So like, actually, I'm a very stressful I feel stressed out. So like practicing mindfulness really helps me like center myself, ease myself. Like to be honest, in this presentation, my heart, like just being in this room, like was beating so fast, but like trying to ground myself and implementing these strategies of like stress reduction. Otherwise, I won't survive. I won't prevent burnout. So being mindful helps me prevent burnout, improves my health. It's not healthy for someone to regulate at a state of anxiety. So mindfulness, also has benefits to students. Thank you, Marni, for keeping me. I could talk
on track.
So in terms of the benefits for students, it's like it can increase student attention. So improved attention reduces also student anxiety, helps helps them teach them calming behaviors, and also like compassion. It's so important nowadays. I see in schools, like, or even through Zoom, like what is being said. So improves, like it increases student compassion to one another, and then also teaches students from a very age to be present and centered and responsive to their learning.
So what we did with this is we did it as a practice-based presentation, and we focused on a series of activities. And we're just going to touch on them. And we provided the resources and the links. So the first one was mindfulness of breath.
Did I talk about it or no?
Well, just the fact that we provide them with what is it about, and what were the resources we left them with?
Yeah, so there's a lot of ways to practice mindfulness, but this we chose is to pay attention to our breathing and to our breath. And so we provided actually in our PowerPoint resources. UCLA has a great program and resources. So there's a transcript, there's a recording. You can also do it like yourself. You can do this in the classroom with your teacher educators, with your students, and then they can also implement it, turn around and implement this in their classroom. So it's like, we wanted actual tools for our people to take away and be able to implement right away.
Our second one was mindfulness in the senses. So, Kimiya, did you want to talk about this one, or did you want me to?
Sure. Well, we actually chose like an object for this, and we asked our students to like practice mindfully eating like chocolate or a raisin, depending on what allergies are in the class. And there was a video clip that actually also walked them through it. I think you can also find the actual transcript, so if you prefer reading through that transcript. But it's the idea of acknowledging all the effort of all the human beings, all the places that this little raisin, all the effort, like all the people that have contributed to this little raisin being grown, you know. And then it's just bringing our attention to be more mindful of this, or eating this chocolate and the texture, the feel. So just like becoming more in tune with our senses and centering ourselves.
Our third activity was mindful listening, and what we did is we took the idea that we listen with our eyes, our attention, our hearts, our ears, and our mind. And this is actually an activity that I learned in my credential program that I used to do with my first graders. And it's just as effective with 6-year-olds as it is with adults. It's wonderful. And it's about taking a little bit of time to practice mindful listening to each other, where one person's speaking and the other one is focusing their whole attention. And what we did is we took this into the Zoom, kind of up in the Zoom sphere, and said, what happens if you're doing this? And it gives you a chance to have and I've done this with educators and students, where you put them in the breakout rooms and they're trying it both with video on and video off. And it makes a change in their awareness of how they're communicating and how they're listening.
I'm still working on that one.
And then our last one we did was this fun Zentangles drawing activity, where you start with gratitude and put 4 dots on your paper, and then draw borders, strings, tangles, which are the drawings, and then you shade them, sign, and appreciate it. So this was kind of our fourth fun drawing activity. And then we ended with a series of other resources that we provided, such as a gratitude journal. And I actually put out a call to a whole bunch of educators and said, what resources would you recommend? And so they all kind of offered a whole series of things. So I also had those all, we integrated them here. And just overall, the impact of mindfulness, how it improves presence both for educators and students, regardless of educational level. And that it improves that, as Kimiya mentioned, capacity for empathy and effective communication and interpersonal relationships, which is also so important in now that we've kind of developed this recognition in 2020. I mean, we've known it as educators, but it's really kind of come up into the spotlight, the inequity that has happened in the civil unrest that's been spotlighted by the pandemic. And mindfulness helps you move beyond your assumptions to see the other side, which is really kind of wonderful. And that is that.
And I found that a lot of these strategies are really like, students will come back and be like, thank you for having me, you know, thank my parents, or having me write thank you letter. Because sometimes we haven't taken that time to thank someone else for the impact that they've had on our lives. And I think like even like creating relationships in our communities with maybe our neighbors that we just say hi and bye to, like writing letters to them, showing gratitude to them. So just reaching out. And I think this time really shows us the importance of community building, of reaching out to one another as human beings, and so saying we're here and we're here to support each other.
That's wonderful. When after the discussion is over, I think we want to see some of your strategy. Can you help us walk through? If we have
We'd
time,
love to walk you through it.
let's do that. That'd be really help us. Any questions from the audience for this presentation? Comments? Maybe it's too early. It's Friday morning. Or
Well,
maybe we
it'll-
all need coffee here.
I'm also curious as to, I'm sure like this is a group of wonderful educators, some of you who I respect so much. Like I'm sure you have practices in your own classrooms that you are already doing to practice mindfulness. And I think like Marni said, you know, like we already maybe have recognized in the field of academia the injustices, the oppressions that have happened to our students of color and the systemic injustices. So, but like, so what are we doing as educators to be like that change, or promote mindfulness, what are we doing to take action within our classrooms? I'm curious, it doesn't have to be just from what we said, but I'm sure everyone is doing something. So I'm curious to learn from you all too.
Hi, I'd like to chime in. Thank you so much for both of your presentations. They're awesome. I really appreciate any type of instructional practices that focus on introspective approaches and self-reflection. I use that in my math methods a lot. There's a lot of self-reflection, and I got through 24 papers last night where we're sort of summarizing some of the major components of the course. And I read a lot of sentences that are sort of like, I really didn't think it was so important to write about myself and how I learned mathematics. But now that I'm at the end of the semester, I realize that I've cleared so many misconceptions that I had about myself as a learner and as a future teacher, and the things that I don't want to reproduce, and the things that I feel are really strength that I've drawn from, you know, my community. So anything that includes this type of self-reflection that takes us at least one step deeper into who we are as parts of communities and of just as learners in general. I appreciate that very much. And I think a lot of mindfulness that can happen in our classrooms is when we're covering content, right? Like, what does it feel like when you're gonna do another math class when you have experienced failure in math for years, right? Like, let's go through that. Like, are your hands getting sweaty? Are you getting a headache? Do you want to just not do it, right? Engage in avoidance and stuff like that. So I think it's about time we really open up spaces to talk about the spiritual component of learning, right? From this much more everyday type of practice, rather than something that is associated with some type of religious belief, right? I think it's only going to benefit our students to ease into learning, especially the challenging subjects for us. So thank you.
I love that you do that within like as a math professor. Like that's so awesome, because I think I've been working on like for my students to look at self-reflect and look at their own biases. And I had students like write to me, I have none. I dated so-and-so. I'm like, but I found Verna Myers. She talks about walking towards our biases. And she gives like a great example of being on a plane and having a woman pilot. She's like, I don't have any biases. But then there's turbulence. And then she was like, oh, I hope this woman knows how to, like fly this plane. And so she's like, I thought I was free of biases, but then not. And I think that really resonated with students, because like we're as human beings, we think like we want to think in these simple binaries of good and bad. but we need to push beyond this. And so like those little moments, those little teachable moments are for our own good. Like we learn from them if we remain ever open and mindful, right? So I appreciate you, Dr. Orozco, for doing that with your students.
Orozco, yeah.
Orozco. And as Dr. Stevenson says, we as human beings need to get proximate, right? He lays out, he's an amazing man that lays out like what we need to do as human beings to be effective, to create a change in our world. And so he said, one of the things is to get proximate. And so my struggle has been like, okay, how am I going to get proximate with my students during this pandemic? So what am I going to do? Does that mean a phone call? Does that mean an email, personal email? Like, what are we doing? I know from Dr. Fisher, Marni, she like has her students text her all the time. And so like, there's that open line of communication and that feeling of support and connection. I'm not as comfortable in terms of texting, but I'm like, I'm on WebEx, a phone call away, right? So it's just like, what are we comfortable with, and what are we willing to give? And we've learned from our students when we're open and willing to learn. Learn together.
I think one of the challenging aspects at the elementary level is we've got like 184 days to achieve all these things content-wise, right? So how do you build the structures of mindfulness and self-care into those, right? And at the upper educational level, like as students who are going to be teachers, we're only just starting to teach self-care, mindfulness, and I think those are starting to, like, teachers are getting into the workforce who are thinking about those things. But it's really challenging to like, how do I fit all these? I need to teach all of these contents. I've got this very little amount of time. Like I need to get creative about how I'm thinking about and fitting these things into that structure.
And James was my previous student, and he's an amazing and human being with so many talent and so much knowledge. And I urge you to actually think beyond that 1 year span and think about like leaving your mark on that student. It's easy for me to say, but I think in the classroom, when I was in the special ed classroom, you get bombarded by standards. You have to teach this scripted curriculum, but like keeping in mind, we're trying to contribute to this whole child, this being. So, okay, let's say we do miss this standard. I know your principal or the scores on the exams, maybe they won't be so happy about that. But at the end of the day, if we're contributing to this whole child, this being that has so much potential, that if we like to change the world, I think like, so keeping in mind, like,
it's like
we can't teach from a book. There's things that we can't teach from a standard. That's love, compassion, empathy. So like any moment, I think they're learning, and they're learning from our conduct, our behavior. So our interactions with other professionals. Sorry, Dr. Fisher, go Marni.
It's like Dr. Seuss's Hooray for Different Doofer Day. If we teach them thinking and engagement and exploratory skills, it's not necessarily about the book learning. It's about, do they have the thinking skills and the knowledge to figure it out?
Yeah, I think it's the art of being a teacher, right? You know, there's so much focus on teaching how to do reading and phonics, but there's not so much on self-care, mindfulness, right? So if we're not practicing them or learning about them ourselves, there's no way we're going to communicate that through our education in our classrooms.
And I think that goes to, as educators, we need to avoid fragmentation, to see ourselves as a collective, to see ourselves as whole beings. And so whatever we do, to strive for cohesion, to strive to see everything as like, and like, it's hard that in the daily grind of things, like it's hard to not get sucked into thinking, oh, I didn't touch upon this, or I didn't do this, but like seeing the bigger picture may be helpful.
Thank you.
Needed the conversation. I appreciate that question, because I think that does come up for a lot of us educators at the beginning. We feel like this heavy pressure to get through the weeks.
Cover. Yes. And thank you for sharing your slide. For all of you, they shared their slide on the chat box, so you can take a look at that. Thank you so much. We will continue our discussion after all presentations are over. Let's do the next presentation. Will be, let me see. Okay. Okay. Next presenters, please go ahead and start.
Thank you so much. Just a quick mic check. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. Kimmy, I believe, if I'm saying your name correctly, I hope so. The previous presenter, I love your enthusiasm and your passion. Thank you so much for imbuing me with some of that passion this morning.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Kimiya.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for correcting me as well. So good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. David Sandles from CSU Bakersfield, and I'm joined by my outstanding colleague, Dr. Kirkwood. Our presentation is entitled The Other Pandemic, Engaging Black Families During COVID-19. So to be sure, we've all been impacted by COVID-19, but I would like to ask all of you to please join me in an intentional moment of silence for those who are important. Please join me in that moment. Thank you. As longtime practitioners, Dr. Kirkwood and I, we've noticed certain dynamics present between Black families and schools. One of the dynamics we noticed is a considerable rift between families and schools. This rift for
No.
Pardon?
Is it possible maybe to turn off your video and speak because your voices?
In and out. Yeah, your voices.
Thank you. Let's see if that helps. Hopefully it does.
Yes.
Thank you. The rift I referenced a moment ago has been a considerable source of consternation for both Dr. Kirkwood and I, who collectively have over 35 years in K-12 educational spaces. So we wanted to explicitly explore that dynamic to see what, if anything, arose out of the literature. And in terms of the research, we wanted to know what, if anything, would arise that would influence or support or debunk our assumptions. As practitioners, we developed ideas and assumptions concerning this dynamic, and we wanted to know what the literature and parents corroborate that. So we also know, another thing we know about the dynamic is COVID, using COVID as a backdrop. We know that it's ravaging underserved communities. So Dr. Kirkwood and I both, again, wanted to explore this dynamic and to see what the interplay, how the interplay was affected between schools and Black families. Really quickly, before we jump into some of the data, I wanted to just give, for contextual framing purposes, family involvement, according to Baker, Wise, Kelly, and Eva, 2016, not enough of an immersive process. So those researchers challenged schools and parents alike to reframe notions of parent involvement to more of a parent engagement modality, which really suggests that parents are more, again, immersively involved in the lives of students, both home and at school. So it challenges us to reframe the way we even conceive of parent engagement, specifically with Black families. So to gain insights as to whether and how COVID was adversely affecting Black families and schools and that engagement interplay, we set out to interview Black family caregivers to learn their perspectives. So Dr. Kirkwood will now discuss some findings from our investigation.
Thank you, Doc. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your work, your passion, your commitment to this. And just for context, and you alluded to it earlier, Dr. Sandles, in the context of COVID-19, in the context of national global unrest, we recognize and acknowledge that Black families, Black folk are disproportionately impacted by these factors. That said, we are most fortunate to lift up and to ensure that the voices of Black families are germane to the work that we are attempting to do, specifically around diversity, equity, and inclusion. That said, we solicited responses from 34 Black parents and caregivers, and we use that word caregivers to represent aunts, uncles, foster parents, grandparents that assume responsibility for their Black children, and these are all of school-age children. So we had 34 respondents. They received a link from us soliciting both open-ended and Likert scale questions ranging from not effective to very effective. And the questions that we developed address 4 key areas. First, we wanted to understand, ascertain the parents, caregivers' experience as K-12 students. We understood that their experiences in K-12 systems will likely have implications for the way in which they engage or interact with schools as parents. Secondly, we solicited their responses or about their experiences with schools before COVID-19. So we wanted to do a comparative analysis. What was your experience before COVID-19? And then the third thing was, what is your experience now during the pandemic, working remotely with your children? And then finally, we wanted to know the parents' expectations for schools during COVID-19. And that's good, that's important to know, because far too often we talk about formulaic ways to address inclusive practices to narrow the so-called achievement gap, to ensure there is no learning loss. But we don't hear from families, particularly Black families, in terms of their expectations. So oftentimes there is a misalignment between what we perceive what they need based on what they articulate and suggest what their needs are. So the findings of this survey are as follows. So in response to their experiences as K-12 students, these Black families, a little over 1/3 of them suggested that they had negative experiences as students. Some of them said that their counselors were super prejudiced. Some acknowledged that they were physically, I'm gonna say that again, physically and mentally abused as students. And so you can imagine the implications they have as they're rearing their kids through the same system that marginalized them, that abused them. And then, so next thing we asked them about is their pre-COVID experience. So now they're parents, they've gone through K-12 systems. What is your experience before COVID-19 interacting with school system? 30% had neutral experiences with K-12 schooling systems, meaning it wasn't good, it wasn't bad. They just wanted to get the job done, which really results in negative outcomes for their students, because if your experience is not good or it's bad, that means that students, school systems are maintaining the status quo. And then 20% unfortunately had negative experiences during before COVID-19. One parent stated that they treat me like a criminal. Note the term criminal and note the context of criminalization of Black male parents, Black male students in the K-12 system. So this is before COVID-19. He said in a survey that every day I go to pick up my daughter, they request an ID every day. So that's meaningful to know that this hostility between school sites and Black families still exists even in current day context. So it was just interesting now to learn what is the experiences of K-12 students, K-12 Black families during COVID-19. Interesting enough, during COVID-19, most parents indicated that they had a favorable experience during COVID-19. Why? Because school sites were more cognizant and more conscious of how they communicate with families. They understand now that they have to rely on Black families, Black caregivers and parents to get the job done. One parent wrote, before COVID-19, I could not get a response from the principal. Now during COVID-19, I call. She actually called me back and stayed on the phone with me for over 30 minutes. So it seems like COVID-19, many schools have used this, at least for this 34 parents, as an opportunity to pivot away from hostile criminal practices to sort of an endearment, understanding that now they rely on Black parents and caregivers to support the learning process. Now, again, this is a small subset of parents, very small, but it's good to know that there is some experiences that are favorable within the context of COVID-19. And then finally, around their expectations. So parents, what are your expectations now? And they gave us three themes. One, they want schools to provide a level of empathy, grace, and support during the pandemic, meaning the same testing practices, the same expectations for homework, the same expectations for attendance. There should be an allowance because of the dynamics have changed. Number two, treat all students equitably. So in other words, for my Black daughter or my Black son, I want them to have equitable experiences in the K-12 environment. So the same high expectations that you have for other students, I hope it remains the same for my students. And then finally, which is really impactful in my opinion, parents said that they want school sites to do their job and to raise expectation. One parent quote said, incite wonder. So parents, even in COVID-19, do not want schools to quote dumb down or to decrease the rigor or the experiences of their student. In fact, pivot and use this opportunity to increase the level of engagement, to increase the rigor, and quote, incite wonder with my child. These survey outcomes were very, very insightful for Dr. Sandles and I. We talked about it for quite some time because, like I said, far too often we talk about what Black parents, what Black communities need because they are impacted by COVID-19 and civil unrest, but we rarely hear their voices. So to hear these voices surface and say, perhaps COVID-19 is an opportunity for schools to pivot and to be more strategic in their engagement was really fascinating to hear, and possibly a point of attack and a point of awareness for us as practitioners as we prepare future teachers in the workforce. Dr. Sandles, did you want to add to that?
Yes, masterfully done. Thank you, Dr. Kirkwood. I wanted to add, I had the pleasure of hearing the great Dr. Gloria Latson-Billings here lately, and she referenced how COVID is a portal, it being a gateway to a new environment, a new promise of something better for society in general, but in particular, she was referencing how we school and with Black families. And so I extend that line of thinking by saying, we have to take that same orientation of being healthful and being immersive in the communication with Black families and transfer that beyond the COVID context.
Yes, sir.
Because this is an episodic, if you will, period in our history. We will transcend beyond this at some point. And I hope that that same fervor, the same desire to be immersive in the process of engaging Black families is present beyond this context. And I also wanted to say, I hope it remains not only a decontextualized notion that we have to engage students in general during the time when we're virtually oriented. Even when we are face-to-face, the challenge for all practitioners is to be immersive and engaged in meaningful ways, not only because we don't have that option of being face-to-face, but the call to all educators at all levels, really.
Doc, it is a call for humanizing pedagogy to now for educational leaders, particularly teacher prep programs, to rethink how we teach and engage our teacher prep participants, to get them to first think about the human aspect of working with families, specifically Black families, given the history of dissonance, both culturally and linguistically, and to really be intentional in their attempt to work with and engage families and not to work and operate from a deficit mindset, but to understand the rich assets that exist within these communities.
And I'll add one more thing at the risk of going too far beyond our 5-minute threshold. We are mindful of the time, but I will say, Dr. Kirkwood and I are both keenly aware that Black families are not monolithic. No. There's a state of distinction among Black families, just as there are among any racial or ethnic group. However, we feel we are speaking to the general populace when we talk about some of the challenges and some of the remedies that we offer. That's some of these challenges after. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, that was wonderful. Thank you for bringing up the family's perspective and sharing the data with us. One question I have is, so what's your next step, or what's the things that your university are doing it as a, or what was your plan to do for future?
For at least at CalStateTEACH, with my our system-wide director, Dr. Black, and my colleague, Dr. Barker, we are most privileged to have dynamic faculty that recognize the history of our engagement with Black families or lack thereof. And so we've been intentional about bringing in training in the work of diversity and equity and inclusive practices of understanding of the history of dissonance. And then understanding that as our teachers make move, our future teachers make move, they have to be intentional. So actually lacing the curriculum with specific training and moves to ensure that the experiences that once targeted and dismissed the experiences of Black families are no longer present in our curriculum. So we've been intentional about training and preparing our future teachers to make moves that will support our families. Our curriculum is going through a different overhaul right now as we speak.
Wonderful. Any question or comment from the audience? Yes, Kim.
I would like to thank Dr. Sandles and Dr. Kirkwood, because I think this work is so crucial, so critical, and so important. And I actually think, going back to Dr. Cho, your question of what are Dr. Kirkwood and Dr. Sandles thinking of going to do? I actually would like to put that question onto us as the audience. Like, what is our responsibility as allies, as people in the workforce, instead of saying like should be back on the shoulders of our Black brothers and sisters? No, I think it should come back to our shoulders. What are we going to do as educators, professors, as what are we going to do in terms of our teacher ed programs to teach like an open mindset, to teach that like funds of knowledge that Louise Moll has been talking about for like so many years, to actually go and practice home visits. I mean, after the pandemic, but like there's some of these things that the literature has been talking about, but I don't feel like we've internalized it even as professors or teacher educators, and as administrators in schools. Like I was in the schools, like I saw how it was not like there's this gap between what the literature says and what is actually happening. And so it's like, I think being and doing is really important for us to align what we're saying and our actions. And so like, we have so much to learn from Dr. Sandles and Dr. Kirkwood. I actually wrote down, I think, what the expectations of Black families that they're telling us that we need to teach empathy. So like James, I would say that's first and foremost, like teaching, and that can't be taught from a text, right? So teaching through interactions, finding those teachable moments, finding if you're in a special education classroom, finding like opportunities for all students to interact with your students. And so for your students to learn to ask for help, other students to learn to give help. So it's going to be a give and take, treat all students equitably. I think honestly, we should be doing this, and we are doing it injustice. That actually crushed me when you said that these mothers and fathers have faced physical and mental abuse. But I'm actually not surprised because of our history and our laws and practice and what we're continuing to perpetuate this system of inequality. So what are we doing? I want to put that question, Dr. Cho, that you said, what are we going to do? What are we going to do as allies? And sorry, Dr. Kirkwood, if I'm totally off, but like, that's what I feel like. We need to be action oriented. Each one of us has a duty to create a better human world. So like, I think it also starts at the family level, bringing into our homes after COVID, like people from all walks of life, showing that we love one another and doing it in action.
Well, and to your point, that the experiences that they laid out for us in terms of negative experience in K-12 schoolings have implications for how they engage schools now. And so we often want to ensure that students are learning. So we teach methods, we teach best practices without acknowledging the history that has created such a dissonance between school systems and Black families. Until we first acknowledge that and get at that historical challenge that has presented a problem for our communities, then you can teach all of the methods you want, but you will not move families forward without that understanding. Dr. Sandles, is that correct?
Unquestionably, and very well said. And I'm going to go even further and say, we have to move beyond simple acknowledgement. Turn off my camera to ensure that everyone can still hear me. So I want us to move beyond simple acknowledgement. Kimiya talked about being action-oriented. So yes, so the acknowledgement has to spawn some kind of action. But principally, and I agree with you completely, Dr. Kirkwood, we have to embrace the history of the injurious practices and the injurious thinking that's undergirded those practices that has disserved Black families in particular. We isolate Black families because by every metric, by almost nearly every academic metric and societal metric, Black families tend to be the most underserved. And I'll just say that quite frankly. And so particularly with education, let's look at historically the challenges that have been present. Let's look at possible remedies. There are pockets throughout the country where there have been successful remedies employed. But I would challenge everyone to go beyond acknowledging history, because some people acknowledge the history, then they continue doing what they've been doing all along. So there has to be an action-oriented follow-up that ensues that acknowledgement.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. As a action, our college, CalStateTEACH Fullerton, we changed our mission, and we clearly stated that we wanted just, equitable, inclusive instruction. And we share with all our students, teacher candidate, their disposition, what we expect from them. And also we spent actually 2 last department meeting, we devoted the whole time discussing how as a faculty, we are doing it to make this just, to meet the just equity, making it more equitable classrooms. So anyway, I think we will continue having more conversation later on.
What's
Yes.
missing in most of our curriculum is parent engagement. So we're setting teachers up essentially to fail Black children because we don't teach them how to engage Black families. So we talk about the work of diversity, equity, inclusion as they make teacher moves, but we exclude engagement of families. And so we're really doing them a disservice and really wasting a lot of time if we don't teach them to make those moves.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Kirk.
Wonderful. Any other comments from the audience?
Dr. Cho,
Yes.
you have an amazing professor, Dr. Ashtiani, in the School of Sociology. I've actually been taking through Roots Connected. It's a nonprofit, and paired with Dr. Ashtiani, they've been doing Saturday courses about race and the history of racism. And so I've been actually studying this more deeply to understand it myself, so that I can be more of, like, I can teach more effectively and answer students' questions and actually push back, because I've had it in the past, even prior to the pandemic. So Dr. Ashtiani has been a great resource in terms of pushing me to understand the history more deeply. And she's a tenure track sociology professor at your university, who also does work with Roots Connected. It's a nonprofit based in New York.
Oh, thank you for letting me know. I will keep in touch with her, definitely. Okay, let's have our last presentation, and then we can open up for further. Do we have presenters?
Yes, we are here.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi. Yay. Last but not least. So just like many of you guys are talking, my colleagues and I, we really put on our creative hats when our schools and in-person instruction were closed. We are all methods instructors. I'm a math methods instructor, professor. Dr. Restrepo, she teaches science methods, and one of our partners, Dr. Marsh, she's not here today, but she teaches reading and writing methods. And so we were all concerned about our clinical experiences, because our students suddenly didn't have an opportunity to go into schools and observe instruction. So we spent a lot of time thinking about what are the major goals for our clinical experiences for our pre-service students. And we focused on developing strategies for bringing to the forefront our community cultural wealth from Yoso's theoretical approach. And so we started looking for instructional tools that would help us with that. So we are sharing with you today, or we shared at this conference and sharing again today, our use of Padlet as a collaborative and cooperative tool. If you have never used it, it's sort of like writing Post-it notes all on one website and holding a memory of something that happened in the class. So all three of us have found unique ways of using this instructional tool, but the main goal has been to help our students stay present in an online learning environment and develop work that can contribute to the growth of our profession. For example, in my class, they're developing tutorial videos that we can share with teachers, right? And they're very specific 2-minute, 3-minute tutorial videos on a very specific concept that can be shared either with students, with families, with teachers. They can choose the actual content and have students, watch them. But since in my class, we do a lot of self-reflection, self-exploration about ourselves as learners, we began with our very first Post-it or Padlet on something about yourself with an acrostics poem, right? And students get to share who they are, right? That is different than a discussion post on Canvas, for example, right? It just brings a different dynamic. So I'll stop right here because I know we have a short time. And Christina, would you like to jump in?
Yeah, so hi everyone. It's great to be here and listen to everyone's presentation and also learn with folks, especially how we can move forward our humanization as faculty of our students, as well as focusing on how we as teacher educators can engage in anti-racist work in our classrooms. I think that that is very important, and that maybe the use of Padlet as a tool to interact with students can be used for that purpose as well. So adding to Dr. Orozco's discussion, so she mentioned how she was using her work for math methods and science methods, particularly in my class. I use a lot of the idea of community cultural wealth through the lens of funds of knowledge, as well as unpacking how the culture of power and science affects the ways that students are either supported or engage with that work as they enter either through elementary school, because we know that in middle school that's when students start getting gate kept from science, but also as they enter those spaces and then are then legitimized for their home cultural knowledge and practices. So some of the things that we do in my classes for the signature assignments, which is one of the major ways in which we unpack what the teacher performance expectations that we're beholden to for the state of California in our teaching methods courses. I look at the ways that classroom practice, particularly how students interact with their teacher, how teacher discourse supports or not the ideas and movement of building over the course of the class or over the course of what it means to do a lesson plan, and then eventually what those ideas mean. So are they addressing the DCIs, the core cross-cutting concepts in science, the practices, I look at that through Padlet by having students link ways in which the classroom and the way the classroom is outlined. Like, let's say, for example, they can do a picture, they can do a drawing, and then see how students are sitting with particular students. Are they engaging in think, pair, share? Is there a possibility of ideas being shared over groups of students? Where's the teacher position? How does that work? So that's one way in which we do that. For that particular signature assignment. There's another signature assignment where I look at the resources that exist in the community. So there can be advocacy groups, recreational groups, and other groups that exist. For example, a place called Home in South Central is one example, and its proximity to the California Science Center. So by mapping these ideas through Padlet, we're able to connect how those different resources support students and see that in a way that leverages these the wealth that students already have, so they can have those discussions, build on them, say, oh, I've been doing field work in this place, and this is how students in this area can work with each other. So not only are we looking at this through discourse, through discipline, but also spatially through something like Padlet. So there's an infinite amount of ways we can also share. There's a way in which you can build columns through Padlet. So you can share like lesson plans, a video, and then an analysis, and have students read through that, you know, those resources. You don't have to like keep clicking everywhere or upload them to Canvas, but it's there for folks to see, or even for teachers in the community to have those resources. So there's just a lot of different things that we're envisioning, and we're very thankful for the collaboration with Dr. Orozco and Dr. Marsh, who shared that those opportunities and ways that can build literacies through these different content areas.
Thank you for sharing the practical aspect. I'm sure many of us are interested in how to apply those in our classrooms. Now let me open up to a question and answer for all the presentation, whatever you want to make. Feel free to ask.
I just want to thank you both, because I think I've been learning a lot about the TPEs and TPAs, and so like I like the idea of having students engage in multiple mediums. So I would love if you would be willing to like meet with me, and I just want to see what the insights, like it sounds like you have so many insights, both of you. So like I would love to have like a lunch date online and see like examples of how you're making those columns of lesson plan. You said video, and then it was another column, but I'm curious to see how it pans out. So thank you for that. I'm sure it's really effective for students too.
For sure, I'd be more than happy to set up a meeting. I'll put my email in the chat, and then you can email me and we can figure that out.
Yes, absolutely. I put my email there. Again,
I'm not doing much good for self-care.
Yes,
really not.
As one said, sharing is caring. So hope we all continue sharing and learning and growing from one another. Yes. Any other comments from the audience? You can talk about all the presentation, not just one.
I just had some thoughts. I love some of the terms I've heard today and in these presentations. For this one, community cultural wealth. I really love that. Do you want to expand on what that means?
Sure. So that it's a theoretical framework that was posed by Terry Yoso. I can try to find the citation so that I can add it to the chat. But the way in which that framework works is that there's these, it's sort of a pushback to, I don't know if folks know Bourdieu and this idea of cultural capital, that it sort of makes us think that people who hold white, mainstream westernized culture have some sort of wealth, and that cultural capital is what allows people to enter, to progress through society in some way, shape, or form. But Yoso's take challenges that, for us to think about how students already hold wealth that's existent in communities, that challenges these notions of Western sort of powered, and it's also racialized. Obviously, there's racist notions in this idea of who gets access to cultural wealth and who gets to succeed, but that there's things like family supports or advocating for needs in the community or navigating systems like college systems or educational systems or goals, or she calls that aspirational capital or language and communication skills, right? So it's these different forms of capital, linguistic, aspirational, familial, social, navigational, and resistance that students hold, but we need to acknowledge that. We need to figure out how to tap into those assets to then support that. So that's what CCW is. So it's something that has already been written, but we take that into Padlet as a way for students to recognize that and to build from the work that they do with students in the field to then learn with that in their pre-service courses. So it's something that we can materialize. It's not something that's out in space that we just reference, right? It's something that can then be built into that.
Thank you.
You also mentioned cultural will, community cultural will. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
It's
I
community.
guess I could read.
Wealth. It's wealth.
Oh, wealth. Only wealth. Okay.
Yeah, wealth.
I apologize. I thought it was will and wealth. Sorry.
Any other closing thoughts and comments?
I just want to thank you all because I was like so nervous coming into this. I didn't know what to expect, but then I really enjoyed the engagement, the conversations, and I know James also we both really enjoyed it. So thank you, and I feel like I learn every time I am with people from CCTE. I just feel like I'm learning so much. I appreciate each and every one of you.
Yeah, I would also like to just say thanks for everyone for the opportunity to share your work and knowledge. I think everyone is sharing that this unique experience has created new opportunities for us to think and act differently. And I think if we continue to not only take our ideas, but to expand and act on them, we can create new experiences for everyone as humans. So thank you.
Okay.
I'd like to chime in really quickly and say thank you all for your willingness to engage in these meaningful discussions. I'd also like to specifically talk to James and say thank you for your vulnerability by bringing to light some of your questions, ambiguities concerning the insertion of some of the ancillary school features that we sometimes don't focus on, such as mindfulness. What I will say really quickly to the collective and to anyone else who's listening is one of the challenges I think we face is the challenge of not viewing mindfulness, restorative practices, and other such components as standalone features. They really have to be integrated and very much perceived as essential to getting to the curricular components. So I really challenge everyone to fuse the ideas and not view them as if they operate in a vacuum. They really don't. They really support those curricular components.
As a wrapping up the session, I'd like to turn over to Alan. Do you have any announcement or final thought, comment?
I don't have many announcements in particular, but I do have a couple of final thoughts. One that it struck me really interestingly, the way that the 5 presentations here all, while they're each different and each going one direction or another, there's so much similarity among them. I think that's an important thing to look at in terms of, sort of the impact of this COVID situation and the way that people are reacting to it. I also would encourage everybody to, watch for our spring conference and next fall as well. The research you're doing, keep in touch with us and submit further proposals and keep these things moving along. And one final thought, Kirk and David, what you talked about, the sort of the surprising aspect of your research in finding that things are actually in certain ways better during this COVID period than they were before. That is so spectacularly important in the sense that how can we make sure that we don't go back to the pattern we had before that wasn't reaching out to people, that wasn't involving parents, that wasn't speaking to the needs of people. Somehow that needs to be made really public so that the whole system in California doesn't sort of fall back to where it was. I don't know how to do that, but I think we need to make that information available in whatever way we can, particularly when we come to our spring conference talking about state policy. It seems like what you guys are working on necessarily should be there. Beyond that, just thanks everybody for sticking with us through this whole week. It's been very interesting.
Thank you. And as I had promised to the mindfulness presenters, how long will you take to present? Give us little strategies or?
So did you want us to go through and just kind of walk you through one activity? We've given you the
That'd be great.
We've given you the G slides. All the links are live in it. So the transcripts, the videos, they're all there.
Oh, okay.
If you want to take 5 minutes, Kimiya, do you have that transcript up? You want to do? I got the bell.
That'd be great. And if you are busy, you are free to go.
Yeah, no pressure at all. I know everyone's busy. I also wanted to thank you, Dr. Cho, for this session, and then also Dr. Jones. Like, without you, I feel like CCTE wouldn't be the same, and I miss hugging you.
Hey, I miss that too.
Okay, so without further ado, I have to give credit where credit is due. So this is from UCLA School of Meditation, but it's honestly like, you can do this with your students, you can do this with your families, yeah. So I'm just gonna read the transcript to you, and if you can just like make yourself comfortable, however comfortable you can get, like on a Zoom call. I want you to find a relaxed and comfortable position, maybe seated on a chair, or if you want to move, you can move to the floor or a cushion. Keep your back upright, but not too tight. Hands resting wherever they're comfortable. Your tongue on the roof of your mouth or wherever it's comfortable. And you can notice your body from the inside. Notice the shape of your body, the weight, the touch, and let yourself relax. And become curious about your body. Seated here, the sensations of your body, the touch, the connection to the floor, if your feet reach the floor, the chair. Relax any areas of tightness or tension. Just breathe. And soften your breath. And now begin to like tune into your breath. In your body, feel the natural flow of your breath. You don't need to do anything but breathe. Not too long of a breath, not too short, just natural. And notice where you feel your breath in your body. It might be in your abdomen. It might be in your chest or your throat or in your nostrils. See if you can feel the sensation of breath. One breath at a time. When one breath ends, the next breath begins. Now, as you do this, you might notice that your mind might start wandering. You might want to start thinking about other things. And this is natural. This happens. It's not a problem. Just notice that your mind has wandered. You can say thinking or wandering in your head softly. And then gently reflect your attention right back to your breathing. So we can stay some time here in silence, trying to be mindful of our breath. Just a short time noticing our breath. And from time to time, getting lost in thought and returning to our breath. So you can be really kind to yourself in the process. And once again, when you notice your whole body seated here, let yourself relax more deeply. And then offer yourself some appreciation for doing this practice today, whatever that means to you. Finding a sense of ease, well-being for yourself and for this day and for others.
Thank you. Thank you for helping us release our stress. I wish all well and fight with the pandemic and stay well.